Matthew 21. We're going to look at quickly, hopefully, three stories here in Matthew 21 and 22 that will help us learn a little bit about the idea of purpose and what we can find there. So we'll begin in Matthew 21 in verse 12. It says that Jesus entered the temple and drove out all who sold and bought in the temple, and he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons. Now, it is so easy for us if we have read this story many times, and maybe this is not a familiar story for you, or maybe it is, but for a lot of us we've read this, and it's easy to forget what would have happened in the midst of all this. I want you to imagine the shock of this for a moment. I actually Googled trying to find artwork that's depicted this over the years, and I'm not going to put it up here, but a lot of different artists chose this instance of a story of Jesus to paint and to try to relay what may have happened in this. And it was interesting to me that as I looked through some of those things, there is actually one with Jesus, the way we'll often find him depicted in like the pure white robe with kind of a red sash, and he has the gentle smile on his face as he is flipping over a table. And I try to imagine exactly how that works because I've not flipped over a lot of tables in life, but I have seen that done. And generally speaking, there is not a peaceful smile on the face of the person doing that. I think Jesus is upset about what's going on. And if you could imagine for a minute, maybe putting ourselves into our context this morning, if someone was so upset with something that happened or was said in the sermon, that they came up here and just flipped the pulpit over, what the expression would have looked like, what all of you would have been thinking as it was happening. What if someone was so upset that Jack dared mention a creed this morning? And great point, by the way, Jack, but that Jack dared mention a creed this morning and came up and flipped the communion table over with all of the elements on it and juice and crackers and things, but flying everywhere. What would you think about what happened? And so for us, it's one verse on a page that a lot of us have read many times, but for them, this is unlike any day in the temple. And what has happened here is Jesus came in and saw something that was not what it was supposed to be. Now, we would look at it and maybe even use a word like expedience. This is just something that simplified life. People were coming in from all over. They were going to make sacrifices. They were coming in with different money, and so they would need that money exchanged. They were coming in with different, not having the supplies they would need to sacrifice, and so they need to be able to get those things. And probably early on, that was exactly what it was. It was just expedience. It was something to make things easier, but gradually it became something different. To kill time waiting on the airport on Friday night, found myself walking through a mall in Nashville. I tried to avoid malls after youth ministry days, but I found myself walking through this mall, and there's just kind of a hum of activity in a mall. There are people who are walking to walk. There are people who are there to shop. There are people who have been dragged there by their spouses or their parents or whatever. And there's all this different activity going on, but it is not a place of quiet. You probably wouldn't go there to contemplate life. You wouldn't go there to read and not be bothered by the things going on around you. You probably wouldn't think of that as your place of prayer or anything like that. There is activity. And what the temple has become in the time of Jesus is activity. And not activity that's about God, but activity that's about a lot of other things. So he said to them, "It is written, my house shall be called a house of prayer, but you make it a den of robbers." So his temple had a purpose. The temple of God had a purpose, and that purpose was to worship and to pray and to sacrifice. Now, Jesus particularly calls out prayer here, but it had all these different purposes that were all things of God. All these things were supposed to go on there, and although they were still probably going on there, it seems like the focus had gone somewhere else. The focus had gone into all these other things. Now, he's quoting from Jeremiah. He quotes from Isaiah in the first part of that verse, and then from Jeremiah in the second. In Jeremiah chapter 7, Jeremiah begins here in verse 9, "Will you steal, murder, commit adultery, swear falsely, make offerings to Baal, and go after other gods that you have not known? And then come and stand before me in this house, which is called by my name, and say, 'We are delivered,' only to go on doing all these abominations. Has this house, which is called by my name, become a den of robbers in your eyes? Behold, I myself have seen it, declares the Lord." So think of the things that Jeremiah lists off. Stealing, murder, adultery, dishonesty, idolatry, all of these things that are going on. And so when Jesus quotes this, he brings a couple other things into the same realm as these. And we would look at these and we would kind of understand, okay, all this stuff is clearly bad. These are all things as Christians, these are not fruit of the Spirit by any means. These are things we want to stay away from. And then Jesus adds, banking and commerce, basically. There is exchange of money going on, and there is selling of products going on. Now, if you work at a bank or you work in retail, I am not here to convict you of that this morning. That's not the point. The point here is that within the temple of God, these things have become the focus. And so the thing we realize here is there's a purpose in this. The purpose of the temple, as we said, it's worship, it's prayer, it's this focus on God. And instead it has turned to all these other things. And so this may bring us to the question today of what is our temple? And I think a lot of times we get this wrong because we say things like, it's Sunday and we're going to go to church. And I get it, and I'm not here to try to convince you of terminology or anything like that. I know we understand we are the church when we look at things scripturally, but still, we tend to think of worship as something that takes place here. This is the place for that. So, for instance, in the church I grew up in Mobile, Alabama, we would have what most churches have. Somewhere along the day, one of your kids or one of your grandkids is selling something to raise money for something. They are selling something for their baseball team, they're selling something for their school, or if they're wonderful children, they're trying to sell you Girl Scout cookies or something like that. And there are these things along the line that people will bring to church because where do you know people? You know people at work and you know people at church. And so you will take the things your kids are selling to those two places. And our leadership of the church there in Mobile said, we're not going to have that in church, and their reasoning for it was what we just read. We're not going to turn this into a house of robbers or anything like that. And so what you would have is as soon as you walked out the door after church, there would be all these kids in the parking lot with all the things they were selling. And suddenly it was like the court of the Gentiles, I guess, out there. We were all out there buying and selling things, but not in the building because it was like the temple. But when we look at our New Testaments, the building is not the temple. Whatever you may think of this building. You know, we've talked already about all of the renovations and things we're going to be doing. Whatever you think of all of that stuff, whatever you think of what goes on here, this building is not the temple. And the things we do here, we could do anywhere else. If for some reason the power was out today and it was actually warm outside, we could go out into the parking lot and do exactly what we're doing here and now. Part of our group is in Nicaragua this morning, and they are doing the things we do now. There are people scattered all over Ukraine this morning in varying levels of safety, doing the things that we are doing now. So it is not the temple that is here. It is instead what David alluded to in class this morning. In 1 Corinthians 6, verses 19 and 20, Paul writes this, "Do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, whom you have from God? You are not your own, for you were bought with a price, so glorify God in your body." Our temple, our bodies have a purpose. They're to glorify God. And so in the same way that the temple had a purpose there in Jesus' day and time of worship and prayer and praise, we have a purpose as the people of God. It is to glorify Him. And as he alluded to that Jeremiah passage, when we are living in a different way that glorifies Him, we can't show up here on Sunday and it all be okay. A wise man once said, I have no idea who this is attributed to along the way, being in a church doesn't make you a Christian any more than being in a garage makes you a car. You cannot just show up here and expect everything to be fine with God. Our bodies are these temples that have purpose. So he continues on in verse 14. The blind and the lame came to him in the temple and he healed them. But when the chief priests and the scribes saw the wonderful things that he did, and the children crying out in the temple, Hosanna to the Son of David, they were indignant. And they said to him, do you hear what these are saying? And Jesus said to them, yes, have you never read, out of the mouths of infants and nursing babies you have prepared praise. So do not miss the lessons from unexpected sources, which is what the Pharisees are doing at this point. They look and they're looking for one lesson there in the temple, and there's something else being taught to them, and their reaction to it is indignance. And instead, Jesus says, you can be learning something here. You can be learning about who I am and what I do. So leaving them, he went out of the city to Bethany and lodged there. And in the morning, he was returning to the city, he became hungry. And seeing a fig tree by the wayside, he went to it and found nothing on it but only leaves. And he said to it, may no fruit ever come from you again. And the fig tree withered at once. Every time I get to this part of the story, I think to myself, what an odd piece of the story. I know we like to think in terms of Jesus, everything he does has reason and purpose behind it, but it seems just kind of strange that he walks up to this tree and there are no figs on it, and his answer to that is to curse this fig tree and it will never produce fruit again. And I think we learn in this that the fig tree had a purpose also. It is to produce figs. This is what the fig tree is there for. And so when Jesus comes across it, and it's not producing the figs it should be producing, Jesus finds this tree that is not getting things done. It's not doing the thing that it should do, and his disciples are confused by it. It says, disciples saw it, and they marveled, saying, "How did the fig tree wither at once?" And Jesus answered them, "Truly I say to you, if you have faith and do not doubt, you will not only do what has been done to the fig tree, but even if you say to this mountain, be taken up and thrown into the sea, it will happen. And whatever you ask in prayer, you will receive if you have faith." And so his disciples also have a purpose, as the fig tree did, and their purpose is to produce fruit in faith. It's the same thing that we saw in the previous story here once again. There is a thing that it has been designed to do, and it is not doing that thing. The temple of God has been designed to be this place where things go on, and something else is happening there instead and becoming the focus. The people of God, the disciples in this case, have a purpose. As they learn from the fig tree, there is this fruit that is to be produced, and what is being produced instead? Nothing. And for the disciples, for the people of God, we run that same danger. We could be people who are disciples in name only, or we can be people who are producing the fruit that God would have us to produce. Which are we doing today? So in chapter 22, skipping ahead a little bit, chapter 22, verse 15, says the Pharisees went and plotted how to entangle him in his words. And they sent their disciples to him along with Herodians, saying, "Teacher, we know that you are true and teach the way of God truthfully, and you do not care about anyone's opinion, for that you are not swayed by appearances. Then tell us, what do you think? Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not?" So the Pharisees here have purpose. They want to trap Jesus. And the word that's used here in Greek for trapping is the same word that would be used for ensnaring. The idea of snaring an animal, if you were a trapper or anything like that. One of my friends that I was with this past week in class, he's gone to do outdoor survival training with people that do that kind of thing. And so he actually learned how to survive out in the outdoors with nothing and to go and to make traps to be able to trap small animals and how to prepare those animals if you trap them. And I think people do this for fun. They actually want to go learn these things. And he would practice in his backyard. Poor squirrels. They're just running along, minding their own business, not knowing what's going on. And he had set this snare up for them. And he would trap these squirrels. And then he would teach his kids about how trapping these squirrels works so they could survive one day when gas reaches over $4. That would never happen. They could survive one day with the squirrels that they would trap. And he taught them how to repair it and all these things. The Pharisees are trying to snare Jesus. They want to trap him. And they want to trap him so badly, they align themselves with these Herodians. And the Herodians are exactly what you would expect them to be by their name. They have aligned themselves with Herod, who, by the way, would have been the regime that is allowing for things like the money changers in the temple, that is trying to press taxes and things along those nature. And so they are aligning with each other because the enemy of my enemy is a common friend, isn't he? And so they are all together in trying to trap. And the way they trap, you'll notice in the previous verse, they butter him up. Tell him about all the things that's great about him. You don't give in to other people. You're wise beyond. You're not going to. What do you think about this? And so they give him what they feel like is an impossible question. They give him this question about taxes and whether to pay. But Jesus, aware of their malice, said, "Why put me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the coin for the tax." And they brought him a denarius. So as I look at this, I think Jesus could approach this in any way he wants. And so when he does something, I often wonder, why is he doing it this way? And so I wonder here, why did he ask for the coin? I think Jesus is not aware of money of his time and how it works. I think Jesus doesn't know which coins are used where. I mean, he has just, in the previous chapter, flipped over the tables of all these people with the coins. Why does he ask for the coin? And what we may not understand just reading through this is all of the politics of what's going on at this point. There are the Pharisees and the Herodians that we have mentioned, but there are also these folks that really don't like Rome. And the Pharisees probably don't like Rome all that much either, but they're not as outward about it. But there are people that would love to just do away with this. And in the trap, what they're trying to do is to make a decision where he has this yes or no. And if he picks yes of one, then he's going to alienate one group of people. And he picks yes of the other, he's going to alienate a whole different group of people. There was an uprising in AD 6 where people did not want to pay their taxes to Rome. And Rome put down that uprising because that's what Rome does. But the people who like that idea are still around. And at the same time, there are a group of people that think, we just got to pay the tax to Rome and keep the peace and do all of those things. And again, this is probably a place where a lot of times we will point to this. I should have saved this for next month, I guess, April 15th. We'll point to this around tax time and talk about paying taxes to Caesar and all that. I don't think that's why Jesus asks for the coin. I don't really even know that he's teaching about taxes in the way that it relates to us when it comes to taxes. I want you to look at one of these coins for a second. This is the coin from Tiberius Caesar, which would be the Caesar that follows. On this coin, we don't read all the Latin that is here, but on this coin, the inscription is basically this: Tiberius Caesar, son of the divine Augustus, and most likely the coin Jesus asked for probably has Augustus on it, so we probably have something about the divine Augustus. And then it says high priest, and you may be able to make out on the right side of the coin there, pontiff, which nowadays you hear pontificate a lot of times, but when you hear pontiff, it's the Pope. And whatever you may think of the Pope, we understand the symbolism that comes behind that word. And so why does he ask them for a coin that has this on it? It's going to have an image of Caesar on one side and probably an image of Caesar on the other side, and words about Caesar that allude to his divinity or his priesthood. And he asked them this coin because they are already part of the system. We don't know if Jesus has one of these coins or not. I tend to think no, but I really can't prove it one way or the other. We don't know if the disciples just had Judas carrying the money, and everybody else would ask him for the money when they had to. If you asked me for a check for something this morning, I'd have to immediately turn to my wife and say, "Do you have the checkbook?" Because I never carry it. Who knows whether he had the money or not, but I think he wants them to produce the money to remind them, you have already bought into all this. Now, I like that in God we trust is on our money, although I think most of the people that spend that money probably don't think that. But I don't think that necessarily makes it godly money, one way or the other. They've bought into the system. And in buying into the system, they have acknowledged, at least to some degree, who Caesar seems to think he is, and who the people around think that Caesar is. And so Jesus takes a yes or no and flips it in a way that they never possibly saw coming. And then he says this: Whose likeness and inscription is this? And another question that he knows the answer to. So he asked them, whose image is this? And they said, Caesar's. And then he said to them, therefore render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. As followers of God also have a purpose: to give him what is his. This image of Caesar is on the coin because at some point Caesar's going to call for that coin. If we are people of God, we have something to give back to God. And it's not just in what we did in the last tray that got passed this morning, although that's part of it. But God wants us to give to him. So then that brings the question, well, what is his? And I think he answers that question in a way that very much relates to what we just read, all the way back in Genesis, where it all begins. Genesis 1, verses 26 and 27, God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and the birds of the heavens and over the livestock and over all the earth and every creeping thing that creeps over the earth. And God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. So maybe the question is not so much what is his, but who is his? And whose image is on you? Because if that coin belongs to Caesar because his image is on it, then if God's image is on us this morning, we belong to him. And our purpose is all in him. So when they heard it, they marveled, and they left him, and they went away. So what's going to happen when you go away this morning? Maybe you'll marvel. Maybe you've not thought of it that way before. Maybe you'll just leave them wondering, or maybe you'll just leave here the same way you came in this morning. I hope you will leave different. I hope you won't let this be just another one of those mornings where you just leave and carry on with life as it was before. I hope maybe you will be changed in the recognition of purpose today. So what is our purpose? First of all, to glorify God. I think we learned that in the story of the tables being flipped over in the temple. We are like the temple of God, designed to glorify him. And are we doing that in the way that we live? Secondly, we're to produce fruit in faith. We look at that weird story about the fig tree, and I think we can learn a lesson in that is both instructive and maybe just a little bit terrifying. Because God has designed us to be people who produce fruit in faith. As was alluded to in the auditorium class this morning, We produce the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. These are all the things we are to do. And as David mentioned, it's not fruits. We don't pick and choose which ones of those we do. We are to be people who are all of those things. And if it is the Spirit working within us that's producing that, all of those things in a way that should be pretty much unexplainable to the people around us. We should love in a way that people just don't get. We should be gentle in a way, kind in a way that people just cannot understand by our power alone. So we are producing fruit in faith. Third, we are giving to God what is His. All this stuff that we have, it's His in the first place. We will not take it with us. Whatever money we put in the plate as it comes by, that's His money to begin with. It does not, I've always hated the phrase God's money. There's always been this mentality that once we put it in the plate, somehow magically it transforms into God's money. It was God's money before it ever hit the plate, or before it ever transferred online this morning if you do it that way. It has always been God's money. Our time is God's time. The things we have are God's things. And so we are giving back to Him what is His. And then where Jesus will go at the end of this chapter, we are to love God. We are to love Him above everything else, and then we are to love other people. Those are the things we are to do as we leave here this morning. So today, what is your purpose? Is it those things? Is it the things of God? Or is it too often the things of ourselves, the things that get us further ahead? Today, if that's your purpose, I hope you will change it to be more in line with being a person of His. I hope you will become the temple that He designed you to be, and you will be the people that produce the fruit that He wants you to produce. If we can help you in some way toward that, whether it's following Him for the first time or coming back to Him if you've come away, please come while we stand and sing.